the members of the public that have been very patient while we've come back on a bit later than I said we were. So welcome back if everybody's watching. So the next item, we're now going to go to Mr. Allen. Mr. Dr. Grant is unable to be with us today, so Mr. Allen will take us through the Hawke's Bay Museum's draft statement of intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Napier City Council got in before us with Dr. Grant's services and their meetings at the same time, so he can't be in two places at once. But I think the half-year report for the Museums Trust is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. As far as transactions go, they don't have a lot that washes through their accounts. Obviously, we're aware of the management arrangement that they have with Napier City Council through the MTG, so they're reasonably straightforward. They're demonstrating a sort of a half-year surplus, but that's largely driven by interest, revenue, and some other grants that they've received. The council grants that both Napier City and Hastings District have been providing for their cost of operations. In regard to the statement of intent, you'll see in the financial component, it's largely business as usual. There is an inflationary adjustment that's come through on the council grants. That's reflected in our LTPs. The performance indicators and the targets and the key result areas that they've outlined in the statement of intent are very much aligned with, almost identical with prior years. There's been no change really in that regard. We have a joint working group, obviously, that's working through a number of issues. One of which is obviously the build of the new storage facility. That's currently, I'll touch some wood, on track, on time, on budget. Again, I'll touch. So that is all going well. In regard, there's still some work happening in the governance review space, and we're still hopeful that at some point later this year that we'll be able to bring back to both councils what that future proposition could look like. So really on that note, Mr. Chair, just happy to take any questions on behalf of the Trust.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Allen. Any questions for Mr. Allen? No? Councillor Watkins?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to bring it up later on, but I'll bring it up now. Just in terms of the new development, I see there was a note that because of material cost overruns everywhere, whatever we build, the budget and the work to date was being watched very, very closely, but it didn't say how it was tracking. And I think we should know that. If they're watching it that closely, they must know today, are we on budget? Are we over budget? Are we under budget?
So through the Chair, so the project is on budget. So what happened, you'll remember when we approved the last allocation of funding to the project, we identified the need for a contingency reserve, or a contingency contribution. There was also, through the value engineering process, savings that were identified that was added to the contingency. At this point in time, the project is effectively out of the ground. The structural strengthening works are largely complete. You'll see as you drive past now the elevated flooring, concrete pour is happening throughout, which includes the rail systems for the storage units. It'll go back and forth. So we're through largely the areas of unknown as we've got into that project, and there has been calls on the contingency, but there's still a reasonably large proportion of that contingency that's still available for future, unknowns and variations that may occur over the next 12 months. But to date, as we stand right now, the project is on time, on budget.
Beautiful.
Yep. Councillor Shalom?
I thought Miss Sandra was in there. Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of merging two reports here, and please forgive me, Chair, if I should wait till later. But I did see in our later paper around our quarterly report that there was mention of the Museums Foundation and their contribution that they were trying to raise $1 million. Is that the Trust? I'm sorry, I'm just confused as to how the two sit together.
So the Hawke's Bay Museums Foundation is effectively the fundraising arm for the Hawke's Bay Museums Trust. And the Museums Trust have set them, and we have set to the Trust, a $1 million funding target, which they're right in the middle of at the moment.
So I saw in the quarterly report, which I understand we're not fully discussing right now, that they'd raised 150K at that point. how are things progressing?
So I think, so you might be aware, so the large fundraising element at the moment is selling the naming rights to the individual feathers on the exterior of the dark house.
Great.
I'd have to get an update from Jeanette around that progress as to where they're up to in that, yeah. But yeah, that has the potential in itself, if they sold every fin, to raise $800,000.
Thank you.
And I guess the target for that, there is a deadline because the names need to be engraved or cut into the feathers at the same time that the feathers are made, and that's around August this year.
Yep. Anybody like to know more quick? Councillor Dixon?
Yeah, thank you. I can just give an update from Jeanette today, actually, who's the foundation. She just said the campaign is off to a very good start. There's still lots to do. We're doing our best to drive awareness and contact potential donors. If you want to get a tax relief this year, it's $10,000 for your name on one of those feathers. So you get $5,000 now and $5,000 before the 31st of August. If you want to do it, or you can do it in 4 lots of $250,000. But they're underway.
250.
Oh, sorry. I could, yeah. Oh, I was just checking if Michael was listening, because he wanted to buy 4 feathers.
Went pale. I was listening.
Happy to move the report.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Lixon. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sholem. All those in favour say aye, please. Against? Carried. Thank you. And now, Mr. Wilson, who's been waiting very patiently for item 9, if you could, thank you. Take us from here.
While we wait, there it is. I guess just by way of a brief introduction, Mr. Chair, before I hand over to Mr. Wilson, so you would have got a sense from reading this report of the challenging financial situation that the organisation's in. We cover it very briefly at the front of the report, but yeah, it is in part due to, I guess, the approach we took with budgets last year in relation to setting the 23-24 annual plan. We had been working through that budgeting process up to the end of January, and then Cyclone Gabriel hit, and because of that, and because of the unknowns that had dealt us, the decision of council at the time was to effectively adopt the budget that we had got to by the end of January, beginning of February. So because of that, there are a number of budget variations in this report that are coming through now that ordinarily we wouldn't see if we'd allowed that budgeting process to go through to its fullest extent. So I think just in that context, I'm going to hand over to Aaron, and between us we'll chip in on this presentation.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to make a comment to highlight a correction before I start, and that is in paragraph 4.21, incorrectly states that the Splash Planet project was approved but not budgeted. It did make its way into the budget very late, so I just wanted to correct that, and I'd like to give a metaphorical chocolate fish to Councillor Corbyn for asking that question around that. So it's only metaphorical because I don't spend money on chocolate fish. As Mr. Allen was saying, obviously we've got a really challenging backdrop economically, high interest rates, changes in government direction around the Three Waters, and obviously the recovery work that's been going on. So the Q2 year-to-date accounting result shows a $25 million deficit between in terms of BAU, driven by $14 million in terms of revenue difference, and obviously that operating expenditure being $10.9 million unfavourable. The drivers for that revenue big variance there is in terms of the subsidies and grants of around $10 million that were relating to funding changes in direction with Waka Kotahi, that were budgeted but now not being done. The offset to that obviously is that we're not spending the capital side of that reimbursement that we would have received. Development.
So Aaron, just, I think it's a really important point, I wouldn't mind just labouring is, you see this from an accounting perspective and you'll see that there's a big deficit to budget around revenue. Yeah, like we say, like a lot of that revenue is revenue that's brought in and is then subsequently spent on capital works. What it doesn't mean is that there's a big gap there around from an operational perspective.
No.
There is a gap for other reasons, but largely with the revenue as it comes through, particularly if it's in relation to subsidies, Kotahi subsidies or other government grants, it means that generally there's a corresponding underspend in capital works reflected within that.
Yes, absolutely. Development contributions are obviously under as well. They're $3.8 million under. That's obviously due to the higher interest rate costs and what developers are looking at doing, and that obviously has a slowdown effect in the area. Higher finance costs, we'll see the debt levels in a later slide. They're $3.4 million unfavourable, and that's just a reflection of the higher cost of funds and the higher levels of debt that council are incurring at the moment. And depreciation is $3.7 million of that expenditure side as well. That's higher, relating to the higher asset values that we've had in terms of revaluations from the annual report. There's usually a bit of a time lag, and so the budget doesn't always get in all of the value that the valuations show us. So that's why sometimes you get a bit of movement in there. It is a non-cash. Item, so it's not directly affecting cash per se, but it is still having a financial impact. Operating costs were primarily driven by the Hiratonga House demolition costs, which were approved but didn't get into that budget. And just on that $25 million favourable net revenue to expense line that you see there, as Mr. Allen just explained, that excess revenue there is paying for the CapEx spend. That CapEx spend can be seen in paragraph in the table for 8.6 in the capital spend. And what you'll see there, if you go down the bottom of that table, you'll see the Cyclone Gabriel CapEx costs, and those are sitting at $26.7 million. So that's usually, that slight variance between the two is usually either to do with a small amount of timing as to when the revenues are received versus the expenses that are incurred first up. This is just highlighting another picture of that revenue that you saw in terms of the breakdown. So the dark green that you see is the business as usual actual costs, actual revenue, sorry. The light green is the budgeted revenue, and then on top of that is sitting the cyclone revenues or reimbursements that we've received for expenses incurred. So that cyclone level there is that amount of revenue that was received from the cyclone is sitting at $60 million year to date. So
And just
it's not insignificant.
chipping in again, I think that graph for me really illustrates really clearly is the impact of the cyclone on this organisation. That's just from a revenue lens. The amount of extra money that's been coming into this organisation to fund the recovery is significant. In that, if you just look at that in the context of activity, it just demonstrates the amount of extra activity this organisation's had to undertake in response to the cyclone, over and above what we would ordinarily be doing and looking after our community.
Expenditures are much the same way. What you'll see there is $34 million of additional spend in that Cyclone Gabriel yellow bar on top of the standard BAU, which is obviously, as we've talked about, is overdue to those BAU costs that we mentioned earlier. So that 34 million that relates to that Gabriel spend there, that's in OPEX rather than the CapEx, is we have transport items spend that isn't CapEx in terms of the fact that it's extending the life of the asset. It's actually repairing so that the road can be used or what have you. It's like a reinstatement. So a lot of that goes into OPEX as well. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the year, ought to have a look at that and make sure we've divided it up correctly between the OPEX and the CAPEX spend. So, yeah.
Obviously, one of the things we like to do around this time of year, or particularly after the half-year result in December, is staff work very carefully through their budgets, through their activities, and they look forward to the end of the financial year and try and get an understanding of where we think we're going to land moving forward. So this indicative forecast of our year-end position is really important. In a normal year, it's important in that it allows us to have a view of what the end of the year may look like and make any decisions around, okay, well, have we got underspends that can be reallocated, understanding where our overspends are and what can be done to either cut costs to meet that or acknowledge that those overspends are in place. This financial year is somewhat different in that the impacts of the cyclone and other contributors like interest rates and insurance have contributed to more of an operational or BAU deficit position, or a year-end result that's forecast to be somewhat less than what we had anticipated in the budget. And like Aaron's talked about, there's a number of drivers amongst that. We know around development contributions that area has really been, we're really seeing the effects of a downturn in new builds and how that's flowing through. We're currently looking at what that means for next year's budget and the level of capital spend that we have in the growth space, but we're not seeing or anticipating that position will improve significantly this financial year, so it's flagging that. Like Aaron mentioned, our interest costs, and given we were out in the budgeting cycle, we had anticipated that there would have been interest rate cuts or a reduced interest cost to us, but that hasn't materialised. And our debt is currently at a level that's higher than we had budgeted, primarily due to the cyclone. So our net interest costs are significantly higher, and they will continue to be. And as we work our way into the LTP, that is being addressed, and it is a contributor to the increased the rating requirement going into future years. Depreciation's an interesting one where we get to, and we're forecasting to the end of the financial year, because yes, it is a good proxy for what our renewal spend should be if we're looking after our assets appropriately. In this case, we've budgeted for an amount of depreciation. We've budgeted for an amount of funding for that to contribute towards renewals. So in this instance, we're reporting an overspend in depreciation. It is non-cash, but what it does mean is we move forward into future years and the LTP starts to address this, is increasing our level of renewal, our depreciation funding, which contributes to our renewal upgrades going forward. And generally across the organisation, we've had to adapt to the cyclone. Our operating costs have increased, and that's forecast and is flowing through into our BAU. We're seeing across a number of our support functions to deal with the amount of work this organisation is having to deal with, increased staffing within our IT, finance, HR functions that we need to have in place to better support the organisation to do what it's doing. So overall, it's an untidy picture. It's untidy on a number of fronts, partly because of the budgeting process that we adopted last year with all the uncertainties post the cyclone, but also because of the impacts that we've been experiencing this financial year.
Yes, I'd just like to add too that the negative number then starts to contribute to a need if the capital spend stays at the same level to borrow for that money, because the budgeting from the operational surplus isn't there. That's what the forecast is really telling you, is an outcome from that number being there. We will obviously intend to update this for the next quarter, for the next meeting that comes here as well, because everything's moving quite quickly. So, it's good to report back on that.
I think just one other flag in there, Aaron, is I guess the Splash Planet result. I think in the report where it's lighted acknowledges the fact that this is a financial report to the end of December. And at that point in time, Splash was only in the middle of it, or beginning of its season. So there will be a full, detailed financial report on Splash Planet and its seasons and its learnings coming in May, and we'll at the next performance and monitoring report, meeting, and we will look to have a workshop with council on that sometime next month in April.
Thank you. Are you happy to take questions now, Aaron? Just got a couple of questions, or yep, Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on Bruce's commentary, depreciation. There's an awful lot to sort of try and take in and absorb. But on depreciation being non-cash, firstly, do we depreciate straight line, or do we have some sort of accelerating or decelerating approach to it? It is a straight line. So in reality, does it mean that we're probably over depreciating initially? And therefore, we're sort of creating a slightly unfavourable view when in fact the reality is not quite that bad.
I think when you look across our assets, they're all, the lives of them and the extent to which they need to be replaced is, we have across most of our asset categories now a very even renewal profile. Stormwater is an exception. And there are some others where we're seeing an escalation in renewal spend that's forecast. But I think on average, if you average it out, the renewal spend is generally pretty even, which I think negates some of that. So I guess if you're looking at by asset, it wouldn't be right. When you put it together across all the asset classes and all the assets that we have, it generally smooths itself out. I think the key message though is that depreciation is quite a good proxy for the level of renewal spend that you should be undertaking. And I think, Mr. Verhoeven's, and part of the LTP conversations we've had, demonstrated that level of depreciation cost and our renewal spend is largely in line. But when you get quite large uplifts of asset values, your depreciation goes up, and it reflects generally what it costs to replace the assets that you have going forward.
I was particularly thinking of some of the work we're doing, the recovery work. And presumably, we presumably start depreciating it as soon as it's finished. Is that right? When the conditions should be pretty A1.
Yeah. Can I just say, I think it's a bit technical for this.
Too technical?
Yeah, I think if you want to know the ins and outs, I think we could probably talk to Bruce after.
Well, it's really just I'm only interested in what drops out at the
I think
bottom.
we could probably take that offline if that's all right. So,
yeah.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Very simply, it's really hard when the report we've got in front of us is through to the 31st of December and we're getting to the end of March now. So as we get closer to the year end, I'm just wondering if, Michael, if you're not working really closely with the team, you can get involved and make sure that if we're off this forecast, that there's some really good reporting that comes back to us beforehand. Because what I don't want to be doing is in 3 months' time getting a report for the end of March when actually we've already hit the end of June. It's just all that timing. And if we have to have urgent meetings to sign things off, I'd rather be over-informed than informed too late about an issue that we can't deal with.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Berg. Mr. Allen and I have already had discussions along those lines, so. Thank you. Thank you. Right, Aaron. Sorry, Mr. Wilson.
So capital spend, in terms of capital spend, you can see that the BAU capital spend is under where the budget was sitting. And again, we highlighted some of those, one of those reasons why with the change in government direction in terms of what they were wanting to fund. Forecast-wise, the BAU indicative spend is likely to be in the region of around 136 million. That's versus the budget of around 149. So that shows some of the challenges, I think, in terms of how big that budget was versus what we have historically been able to achieve, which is around, 95 million, I think. So, that does give that indicator. The cyclone, as I mentioned before, that cyclone capital spend there is 26.7 million that they've spent as well. So there is an awful lot going on in the capital side. Obviously, it's not all on the BAU, but those resources are being used across both the BAU and the cyclone. So, yeah, it just paints a different picture there.
Through you, Chair, just in addition to that, one of the things we're working through with the long-term plan and with officers is, you know, the importance of the forecast to year end, not only from an operational perspective, but also in capital expenditure, is that we really want to avoid carry forwards as much as we possibly can going into next financial year. If we're forecasting an underspend this financial year, well, let's have a look at what that means in year one of the LTP. Is it still required? And putting that into next year's capital program, what does that look like compared to, you know, the program that was existing, and actually all of that, the deliverability lens, is that all doable as we move forward? So the capital program in here is really important, that we're trying to get this as accurate, and the forecast of it as accurate as we possibly can. You'll see some when I first looked at it, you go, are we really going to do that much? In the Cyclone Gabriel response and recovery area, I think that's entirely realistic. The level of spend going from 26 million to December to 85 by year end, because of a reasonable chunk of that is the Category 3 buyouts. And that's really gathering momentum in the second half of this financial year. We are looking at and working with Mr. Hanson in particular around, you know, some of our big growth projects, delays in getting materials into the country. What does that mean? Have we captured that appropriately? Do we need to do something more with next year's budgets as well? So it is sort of it's an alive process. It's one that we're continuing to work our way through and keep on top of.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, thank you. Just touching back on what Councillor Kerr mentioned before and the timing of this reporting, you've just spoken about the buyout process. Where does the reporting structure for that sit? Is that within this committee, and therefore we should have an update, or where?
We have aligned that to go through strategy and recovery.
Okay.
The last meeting didn't take place because there's only one agenda item. That agenda item was an update on recovery, and I believe that was circulated separately.
That's correct, yeah.
You, Councillor Harvey? Right, Aaron?
External debt, we're sitting at $353 million 6 months through. And as an update, a live update, we haven't borrowed any further from that. You can see that we're looking at around the 400 million in the forecast. Mr. Franklin and I have done quite a lot of close work on that, looking at where we think the capital spend will be, and what the impact in terms of debt is. It's just interesting to note that, you know, we finished last year at 292 million, and we're talking about 400 million. That's $108 million spend forecast, you know, in the current year. So when you look back at those other trends in the past year, you can see that it certainly is challenging. We've never spent increased that debt by that amount in such a short period of time, with the sheer amount of work and recovery, etc. that's going on.
Councillor Cook, sorry, Councillor Corbin, have you got a question about this?
Yes, I do. When do we need to review our treasury policy?
So that's...
That'll be reviewed that's being reviewed as part of the long-term plan, and that's something that there's a key element to that, which is around the limits that we operate to, and the LTP Working Party have had conversations around what that limit should be, and that's the key driver. That's the key change that we'll need to make within the treasury policy.
Yeah. So when is that? When do we have to review it?
Now.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be part of the LTP that we bring through, and it's certainly been part of the conversations that the LTP Working Party have had.
Any questions otherwise?
Any more
further
questions?
questions?
Any more questions on the wider report, the things that Mr. Wilson and Mr. Allen haven't covered? No? Right. Okay, therefore, in terms of, well, could I please have a mover? Thank you, Mr. Wilson. A mover to accept the quarterly financial report. Councillor Watkins, seconded Councillor Dixon. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we move to the last item, item 10, which is the big report, performance and monitoring report. And Mr. Allen will speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the sort of second time we've brought to you a sort of a revised version of this report, and thank you, Taylor, for pulling this together and making these changes. And what will be Taylor's last performance and monitoring report that she prepares for us, but she's got us in good shape. So thank you for that. I think I'd just like to probably point your attention to page 7 of the attachment volume 2, where there is 10 sort of highlighted areas of work that we're sort of bringing to your attention, and there's more detail within the report. So, within the Flaxmere land development, as we talked about, that work's largely complete. We're now progressing, as we've talked to you about, the strategic sell down of that land, now that those development areas have been undertaken. You'll see within the planning and regulatory element of the report that we're seeing that continued trend of consent activity declining. In the aquatic space, activity levels, we're seeing those activity levels declining. We're feeling the effects of the regional aquatic facility at Mitre 10 Park that was anticipated, but we're really starting to see that flow through into the activity, and that's covered in the report. I talked about the Museum Research and Archive Centre on a previous agenda with the Museums Trust. Within the parks area, there's been, I guess another area quite affected by Cyclone Gabriel, and there's been some good work continuing in that area, delivering our upgrades, but also focusing on those Cyclone Gabriel remediations, namely at Poketapu and Te Mata Park, and some really good positive feedback about what the work that the staff did in Te Mata Park as well. Partly funded by, or jointly funded by the Tourism Infrastructure Fund, which has been really helpful in getting that work done in a timely fashion. The landfill development is progressing well. It's tracking in line with the plans. Good response from the market in regard to getting that work done. A good update in the report around the strategic risk register, highlights some features around financial sustainability, liability from legal challenge, growth planning, significant operational service failure. I think as an organisation, we're feeling risk from a number of areas. I think more so than we have previously, and it's not singular. It's from a number of areas, and the work that Regan Smith, as our chief risk officer, is doing is sort of helping us and putting us in a good place to respond to those risks as they come at us. There's actually quite a detailed update on civil defence in relation to our emergency management readiness and the work that we've done and the team have done over the last 12 months. So that's provided in the report. Quarter 2 is always a busy events season, and the team have done a lot of work, and that's detailed. And then lastly, at the back of the report, there's a good section on the recovery works. 2 point, a small amount, Councillor Harvey, picking up on the work that is going on. It's not the complete report that goes through strategy and recovery, but there is some commentary there as well. So on that note, happy to open it up to questions. I do have my fellow GMs here to answer questions, and they'll be more than happy to.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a few questions. I wonder if I could just start on Howard Street. I just see the land acquisition discussions are taking more time than expected. I thought we had actually settled all the land acquisitions. That comes as a surprise to me.
In the last few weeks, is we've just concluded the last acquisition, and that was the last little bit that went down towards the little stub leg that comes off down and towards the area of land that Parkwell School was leasing.
Okay, so my second question, it says the Density aspirations by developers higher than originally planned, putting pressure on design capacity. So if we've budgeted for infrastructure to our design, and the developers are trying to increase density, which takes out headroom and our capacity, and we have to design for further capacity, who pays for that?
So there is, obviously there's a consenting process that needs to be worked through in that space. That area has been designed to accommodate a certain capacity of houses. That is what the team will work to. So if we get a development proposal or a consent application from a certain developer in a certain land area within the Howard Street zone that is greater than can be accommodated, the consenting team will work through that with the developer at that time. The key is to work within the constraints of the development area, not to over allocate the resources that have been put inside.
So my understanding, a lot of that infrastructure is already in ground, is that correct? So if it's in ground and designed to a capacity that we projected, and then a developer comes along and says, well, I want to increase the development, we design for a certain headroom and capacity, but that developer takes that out, then it leaves us with an infrastructure when it starts off.
Actually, I might Mr. Thu to come up front and step you through that a bit more. Get an engineer rather than an accountant.
Through you, Chair. I'm not directly involved in the discussions as they're playing out, but in the most simple terms is to use a parallel that we had in the Irongate industrial area, where we worked out that there would be a certain amount of equivalent households that a land area can service, so that gave them a maximum flow. So if a property owner would like to have, say, 50% more households on the same land, they, in order to get past the hurdle of a consent, they would have to demonstrate how they're going to mitigate their peak and ongoing flows to no more than that land would have had at our design and densities. So they would have to have storage to let the wastewater flow out at a set rate. This is primarily a wastewater limitation, not so much stormwater, because there's already requirements in the plan to mitigate to set intensities, and drinking water is largely the flows for drinking water is set by the fire system as different to the density housing. So if someone wants to have more homes, they would need to mitigate their peak and ongoing flow rates to no more than the equivalent households that we have designed the subdivision for. And if they can't do that, they wouldn't get permission for additional homes.
Okay, so there's no cost or further liability on council?
No, not for that reason, but just to flag, we will likely be coming back to you just around some other cost pressures in the Howard Street design process as the constructions work through, just working through some challenges once we've got options or whether we can work through those, but it's likely we'll be coming back with a paper in and around the wastewater pump station system and the geotechnical challenges that we've found. But that'll come back to you once we've got a bit more knowledge on that.
Okay, thank you, Craig. May I carry on and ask another question? Thank you. Just in security teams, that was page 27, just talking about the homeless and talking about multiple agencies need to be involved. And I'm referring particularly to Southland Road down to Storford Lodge, where we're just seeing increasing numbers of homeless people. So it says here, multiple agencies required to address this. So who are the agencies and what is actually happening, please?
Thank you, Councillor Watkins, through you, Chair. The agencies, for example, at MSD Health, and all the stakeholders down those roads. So we are already in a number of meetings and engagements with those people, and also with Napier City Council. But there are ongoing discussions about how we manage our homeless whānau.
Will there be a solution?
It's obviously a very difficult thing to find a solution for. We're looking at multiple solutions actually across the across the world that have been looked at, because obviously it's not an issue that's just in Hastings, but it is worldwide and seems to be getting worse. So is there a solution? Not a really visible one right now, but a number of things are being discussed.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question, in terms of senior housing, I just see it said there'd been a fire, and there was delay with the insurance and building that's dragged this right out. I mean, why would there be a delay in something which I would have thought was fairly simple?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. From what I understand, and Craig Mr. Thew might be able to add, there was an issue with asbestos, and so that meant a delay in the insurance people actually being able to get in and properly assess. The assessor wasn't able to get in a timely manner. There had to be work done to the site to make it safe because of the asbestos that went to the surrounding area from the fire.
So we're still on target for third quarter completion?
Understand, yes.
Yep. Thank you. Oh. Just have one more question about just the Toitoi numbers there on page 35 and the metrics. I was just trying to understand tickets sold in the current quarter were 14,000. In the previous quarter, only 7,000. But the number of events was the same. It's sort of like, well, virtually the same. Is that a correct figure, that previous 7,000?
Through you, Chair. I presume the figures are correct, yes, but obviously the events might be the same number, but it depends on the type of event it is. So, you know, some events will be quite bespoke and might be for a smaller audience, whereas some might be for more.
It just seemed quite a significant difference, you know.
Overall, the numbers are pretty similar. Like if you, you know, oh, sorry, no, excuse me. Yes, we can check those figures.
Through you, Chair, if I may, one of the big things over that period was the International Comedy Act, Bill Bailey, which was a massive sellout. So, in lieu of one of the officers being able to answer it, I believe that period was a big period for Toitoi in terms of major events.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Since we're on page 33, talking about Toitoi anyway, I just wanted to ask whether or not, I'm aware we've got a Section 17A review going on at the moment, and was just wondering whether or not within the scope of that will be the feedback we've received around the lack of parking and accommodation impacting our ability to attract conferences to our venue. I'm just kind of trying to get an understanding of what that will capture and what information might come back to us.
The scope currently, no, is more about the operating model, the finances and the ways that we operate Toitoi. However, obviously there has been work done on the parking survey that was done last year, and my understanding of that was that there wasn't, the outcome of that was that there wasn't a need for additional parking.
Yeah, Mr. O'Shaughnessy could probably talk to that better, but from a Hastings-centric perspective, I think that the general understanding was that there was sufficient. Whether it's on the right place or not, I think that's probably more the issue, and we certainly acknowledge that there's been feedback from patrons that there isn't sufficient, and that the lack of parking and the lack of accommodation does impact on the Toi Toi staff's ability to attract larger sort of conference events.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, not trying to relitigate previously discussed parking discussions, just noting that it was within this document highlighted as an area that's a daytime parking and lack of accommodation being a challenge for attracting conferences. So it will be interesting when the Section 17A review comes back, just to understand if there is infrastructure like that is impacting our ability to operate in certain areas, and how that affects the operational model going forward. I have other notes, but I will find them and then turn my mic back on if that's all right, Chair.
Thank you, through you, Chair. First of all, thank you, team, for such a comprehensive report. I do read lots of risk management, reports, and this is very well set out, lots of detail, and I acknowledge the work that's been put into it. I'm just touching, really, it's just acknowledging I'm on page 63, the highlighting the significant operational service failure, the potential for, and looking at the year ahead and so much work, particularly around roading, with such a lots of work coming up. And then if I look back to 61, risk 1, we are still 8 staff short, and the gap between salaries. So it's not really a query, it's just acknowledgement of what's coming ahead of us, and any comments would be appreciated.
Through you, Chair, I think that problem is across all the areas. Transport, obviously, with the high workload with the rebuild, it is quite real, because of the 8, I think we've got 4 vacancies in that transport team that we're trying to fill. And we are having a struggle at the moment in terms of where we were setting our salaries versus market expectations, that we're working with as an executive team around a pathway forward, because we need to secure good people to look after client interest. In the meantime, from a transport perspective and a couple of the other areas in the assets, we are leaning on and seconding staff in via a professional services panel. So whilst that's useful to keep the machine going, it's not quite the same, and it does cost us more in the interim, because we're obviously paying charge-out rates, which have multipliers on top of base salary. So it's a definite focus. When John Nichols asked what keeps you asleep at night, that is probably a key part of my existence at the moment, is around how we keep resourcing. And if I may just inject to the flow, I've asked Marius to come down. Marius has 3 hours and 50 minutes left. Marius has about 3 hours, 50 minutes left working for Hastings District Council, and I just thought, unfortunately I missed his leaving function with the rest of my team yesterday. I was over in Napier, but it was actually, given the amount of work he's done, looking after transport assets, and then just really special recognition for the huge amount of work, working with communities who are really struggling through post-cyclone. Just really thought it was more appropriate to do my final thanks to Marius and give you an opportunity to say something for the massive amount of work. Hugely passionate about looking after the network, really frustrated at the lack of funding, particularly from our funding support, but I do wish him the really best as he and his partner do travels, and then work out what his next step in his career is. So just a massive thank you from me, and if I hand over the chair to the councillors, just as an inject to the flow, apologies, it's just that was a perfect segue.
Sure. So what we'll do, thank you, Mr. Thu, we've got Kevin, and we've got Councillor Watkins and Councillor Kerr as next speakers, but if anybody wants to just make a appreciation about Marius, feel free to do that. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would. Marius has been with us for quite a long time now, 10 years, I think, Marius, is it? And I've worked very closely with Marius on a lot of community roading issues, and I will stand up.
That's better. Thank you.
Marius has one of those rather lovely abilities that when you're working with people who often get excited and heated up, he has the ability to just calm them down and step by step take them through the process of what we're trying to achieve. So from a councillor point of view, Marius, I've really loved working with you. We've had a great working relationship, and I've seen, you know, in the public arena, how you operate and the respect that's been generated back through you to council. So all the very best in your new endeavours, and I hope we'll still see you from time to time. But thank you for everything you've given to Hastings District Council and the people.
Yeah.
Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. I'll start standing up. Marius, we, the rural community, are going to miss you. You have been the go-to person when there's been I don't know who to go to, don't know who to ask. I'll ask Marius, because if he doesn't know the answer, he'll know where I can get the answer. And I have fond memories of a meeting out at Pukeamoa School, which had the ability to go a bit rogue. And there's some interesting personalities. And I just remember, as Kev said, that really calming way of taking a very heated question, statement, challenge, and just being able to answer it. I also remember in jest pulling up every time there was engineering jargon that popped out, like talking to the community about AWPT. I can't remember the others, but and GPSs and etc. So you'll leave here leaving us with fond memories of you and your work. So thank you for all that you've done as well. We will miss you, your work and you personally. Thank you.
Just my appreciation for council support through the years. It is sometimes quite challenging, as you all know, working with the public. And so it is good to know you've got my back and we can push forward with these projects. I just reflected yesterday with the team upstairs, the achievements we've done over the last 10 years. We've built over 65 kilometers of new road or AWPTs, project renewals, 65 kilometers, and we've surfaced well over 750 kilometers of road. And it is just maintenance that's driving the day-to-day running of the transportation network, but it needs to be done if we want to control costs for the community. So, and it's important work. And then there's the AMP and a whole bunch of supporting work that you need to do.
AMP's the asset management plan.
Asset management plan, yep.
Right to the end.
And that was a lot of work, and I think we're in the top 10 of the country as scored by REACH, which is a good achievement. And
Who's REACH?
Road Efficiency Group.
Sitting in my mind.
Yeah, and so those challenges are continuing, and yes, 10 years is a big chunk of time, and I felt it's a good time for me to go on a bit of a revitalizing treatment for myself, and do some traveling, and then come back and then see what challenges lies ahead. And so, yeah, thanks very much, everyone.
Yep. I think it's appropriate to give him a big round of applause.
And Marius, we'd like to see you back here when you come when you return. Thank you.
It's my clear that I understand the door is wide open.
Yep. Thank you, Marius. Thank you. Yep. Councillor Watkins, did you want to continue on? And Councillor Kerr?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Look, I do have two more questions. First one on page 56 relating to drinking water. And in the performance measurements there, part 4, I noticed we had a target of 100% compliance. And the achievement to date says the bacterial compliance, minor non-compliance is associated with low chlorine readings and samples not scheduled correctly. That concerns me. And I want to understand, with all we've been through, how samples are not being scheduled correctly.
Through you, Chair, it equally concerned us when this cropped up. So where this happened is as we moved through from the old regime to the new regime, and so what this is we weren't short of total samples, but it was around the scheduling, around how many per week, not being on same days and subsequent week. There was a handful, I can't remember the exact number, there was a few where we ended up duplicating a day or we had skipped a day. So our total samples rate was a scheduling approach. That had been worked through with our supplier and that has been resolved, and there are now new checks and balances. So it was around, as we move to how many samples we do, how many not repeating days of a week, and so it's a technical complication. It shouldn't have been there. We have talked through with the supplier, taken actually some of the stuff off them to own it more directly, and work through. And there was also a contractor failure where their sampler was sick and they didn't actually tell us or didn't backfill it until the day after. So there was a sample that was about 12 hours late.
So we've got the issue sorted?
Yes,
great.
it is something
Great.
that Kieran and the service assurance team under Steve are all over, and we're also in the process, separate to that item, but in a related, where we're currently at the market with our laboratory contract, which includes all that sampling, and that should come to end of evaluation shortly.
Thanks for that, Craig. And you might be able to answer my last question, which is on page 60. Just relating to Howard Street there, where it says unforeseen costs relating to geotechnical issues with construction. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Through you, Chair, that's, as I mentioned just previously, that we will likely have to come back to council. So part of, and Dave behind you may be able to help if I get this slightly wrong. So part of that subdivision includes a wastewater pump station. The wastewater all flows away from town and then we have to lift it up and push it back into town. That pump station is deep, 5-6 metres deep, and the ground conditions that they've found have shown quite a more unstable ground than had been originally foreseen. We're currently working through design options, but the initial one that's come back requires, in simple terms, strengthening the ground at that depth so it actually doesn't tip into the stream or the treatment plant stays where it's supposed to be. So the team are looking at, is that ground stabilisation proposed the most effective way? Are there alternatives? Is there a degree of risk in terms of that council could accept that, like you can be super robust and you can be pretty robust? And so they're working through all that optioneering at the moment. And I've also asked for just a review around where this finding this late in the piece is the potential liability on any of our service provider, either the contractor or the designers, where this problem may sit not just on our plate but may sit on someone else's. So that work is all underway, and we'll come back to you if we can't resolve the price back to budget, and around choices, and if we can't get the price down, we'll need an approval to spend further into Howard Street. Oh, I'd have to come back to you. It has to be fast because otherwise we'll end up into contractual cost for delays. So the team are doing that work right at this moment, and so I would expect the next council meeting that we have a chance to write a report for.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you very much, through Mr. Chair. Picking up on a similar question Kev asked about the baseline water having 100% compliance. Just generally, we have baseline performance measures for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater. Apart from the obvious ones of 100% for drinking water, where do those other baseline performance measures come from? How do we influence them? Are they coming at us from DIA, or are they performance measures that we impose? So I think page 56, if that helps. It's, for example, 57 minutes for an urgent call out, or
So these have come over the years previous. So there are the metrics, some of the metrics are DIA metrics, but the thresholds was historic levels that council had.
Okay.
It's never been a really deep discussion through. The contract has, our maintenance contract have set response times that we're monitoring too. So time to first response, time to closure as contractual performance measures. That's a job by job one, but those targets are historic from a number of LTPs ago, and on the days when we used to do a deeper and longer dive into LTPs around levels of service and choices. So they haven't really had a formal review for quite some time, and there are a couple in there which aren't actually particularly practical or sensible.
Can I just, without creating a whole lot of work, where there are some that don't seem logical or sensible, ask that they're reviewed, and if it doesn't happen this LTP, are we able to change them within an annual plan setting? So just maybe just an action for the lead team to have a think about what these baselines are, and are they of value?
Yep.
May I
We'll call that
continue?
as an action.
Yeah,
Yes.
may I continue? Clive Campground Management.
That's mine.
Is that your question? I'll park that
No,
question.
that's good.
I'll leave that for Her Worship. Senior housing, once again, this report is already 3 months old. I'm just really interested in how we're going with the management of the rental changes, the support of our very precious senior members of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Through you, Chair. Well, obviously, since this report was written, we have reached the date where the increased level of rent is now in effect. There have been a handful of people that we have had to give some extra assistance to through MSD to get things smoothly running. One of the issues that came about was that MSD pay in arrears, so there was a little bit of a hill to get over, but now we've smoothed all that out with the tenants, and so everything is now in place, so that tenants are paying the increased rent. We have had a slightly increased level of tenants leaving our senior housing because they've decided to move in with Whānau, which actually, that's obviously their choice, but what that has enabled is for us then to get some off the waiting list that don't have the option of living with Whānau. So as this is for senior housing people who really don't have those choices, it is good to enable more spaces for people without the ability to go to Whānau.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Really positive response. And final question.
Yes.
And I can't find the page, unfortunately. I'm scrolling desperately trying to find it. Civil Defence and Emergency Management. I'm not sure how I address this to, so I'll address it to the Chair. There has been or is being released a national report. There has been the Hawke's Bay report. I'm really interested in how Hastings looks at our own learnings and implements that. So my question is not about how well did we do. My question is about have we captured the learnings, and how will that piece be fed back through into our systems?
Through the Chair. So thank you. Yes, we have captured a number of learnings from our own operation in the response, and I think from our perspective it is an important piece of the puzzle from a number of the different reviews and activities that have been done. So we've got our own learnings. We know the learnings that came from the Napier City Council review. We've now got the group CDM review and its learnings. The government inquiry, as I understand it, is with the Minister, and that will be released to the public in time. Not now, but in the weeks ahead. So I think all of those, there's learnings amongst all of that, and as we move forward and put in improved practices, whether it's at a local level, at a regional level, or a national level, all of those need to be brought together. With a lot of the learnings that we've identified, a lot of it's is being put into place now. A lot of the work that Rebecca and the team have done, that have been funded with MPI and the Red Cross, is in the process of creating better, more resilience across our more remote rural communities. That needs to it's not just that initial investment, but we need to have an ongoing involvement in that space to ensure that we don't have slippage back to what was before. So we need to take advantage of the gains that we've made now and continue on. So I think we just need to work through, I think, a bit more at an exec level, how we bring that back.
Thank you.
To
Also, through you, Chair, can I just add?
Yes.
So what the regional leaders have asked of the chief executives, I don't know if people saw the CEDAM review presentation online on Monday. So the joint committee meeting on Monday was, and there's two recommendations there that I put forward and got support from my colleagues. And one is that we have an independent expert that will lead the 75 recommendations from the Bush International Consulting Review, and that means that it's taken away from the individual agencies that run CEDAM and actually lifts it up to an expert level of both national, regional and local delivery of civil defence emergency management. And the other recommendation was that we have an independent committee member who is an expert in emergency management, who sits on the group committee. So we have someone who can ask the questions of how we are delivering. The review will come back to our council for adoption and to be received. So they might Bush International Consulting. At the next council meeting, there will be a paper for you to receive the report, and that will be also with a one-page recommendation from the chief executive on an action plan. We have to move at pace and urgency. We have to rebuild the trust and confidence in our community. We have a long way to go. We've got 75 recommendations, and that is fantastic because we have a pathway and a roadmap. But that's the next stage of this journey. We received and adopted the report on Monday as a group committee, and now we have to take it forward to say, how are we going to implement this? And we'll be talking with the Prime Minister on Wednesday when we go down there about the whole national emergency management system, its failings, it's broken. The recommendations, there are a lot of recommendations at a national level, at a NEMA level, in the Bush report. So we have a clear pathway forward, and we have to get on with this now. This is a really important piece of work. Yes, we're setting up resilience. That is our responsibility to our community. And we have to make sure in our long-term plans for future that resilience is a really key part of what we do. We must get some of the money from the lotto money that the last government set in place. So we invest in, and it should be about around 4 million coming into the region. We have to get that through our organisations to apply to that funding, to get that funding for their resilience in their communities. We can't apply for it, but we can help through our connectors. So there are many facets to this recommendation. It's a very good report. It's a very good read. So, you know, when you haven't got piles of papers over the weekend, I suggest everybody reads it, but it will come back to you for adoption because it is a regional review of both national, regional and our local, how we look after CEDAM. So that's just an addition. I hadn't had a chance to share that from Monday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr?
Thank you, Your Worship. So following my questions and Ms. Sandra's comments, it would be really, for me, important to have some form of governance oversight, like just a mini group reviewing it as it goes through as changes are made with the more formal reporting back to council. I think that would be beneficial.
Through Mr Chair, I think so there's an appropriate, I think, connection in with the Strategy and Recovery Committee, with
Yes.
this, as well as we, I guess, develop the framework and the implementation plan.
Yes.
And as we move forward to bring it through that, connected in with
Yes.
the recovery element of that committee as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Sandra?
Through you, Chair. Just got a couple of questions. When will the toilet block be finished at Clive?
I'll need to come back to you and give you a date for that, sorry.
Thank you. I've got a resident that's asking me and talks about the contractors often, so we need to have, we need to be able to give them some communication, I think, about when that's going to be done. It's hopefully before winter. My other question is, when we collect the data on our communications, and I really like this page 70 and page 69 customer service, it would be really helpful for me to sort of, while we've got program highlights, that means that the general breakdown of the calls and what people were asking, I'd really like to understand, perhaps in a bit more detail, some of the main themes of complaints. So we've got 33 complaints and random in nature. I just wonder if we could get a more detailed report on what some of the complaints, so the areas that we know that we're hearing from.
Through you, Chair. This is something I've picked up recently, that we currently don't have oversight of complaints or compliments, because we do receive both. And at the moment, the plan is to bring in a quarterly reporting, which will also go to lead team, because we also need to do operational response to those, any themes that do come through. So yes, Mayor, that will be coming through to you as part of the report.
Okay, great, thank you. So can I also understand roading and transport? Craig and Deputy Mayor talked about this. So it looks like we've got 8 vacancies in the report, that's what it says here. My concern is, you know, and what is our strategy to address this issue? We've got, you know, that is going to be our biggest piece of recovery work, is our transport network and rebuilding. So is it that we need to bring people in from overseas and be one of the government's, under the government scheme, to be able to have a direct access to people overseas? I mean, we have to have a plan how we're going to address this, because the urgency and the community wanting to have restorations of our transport network is increasing by the day. People are getting impatient and want to see some results.
Through you, Chair, some of those vacancies we've just signed today, a new bridge engineer, which will fit in. Obviously we're at market to replace Marius. The other couple of roles that are quite critical to the recovery, it's particularly as the build speeds up, we'll be in around being out and about on site, keeping an eye on things. So we've got a little bit of time before they'll really burn. But as I mentioned before, we've got most of those vacancies in the transport, well, all of the vacancies in the transport area, aside from Marius' looming one, have been filled by secondments. And even with the new bridge engineer, which is signed up, but he's got a 2 or 3 month departing clause notification period with his existing employer. So we've just next week we have an additional person which will be coming in from Becker's, who will also maintain once the new person starts. So we've got continuity. And so we are doing what we can in terms of, as I mentioned before, leveraging from our panel. And the other piece is, quite frankly, we're just going to have to move our remuneration level to be competitive in what is still a hot market. I'm hopeful with the slowdown around the country that there are people becoming free of work. So one of the people we've got coming into working in Francois' team is coming off the project on the Picton Terminus project. So he was going to be working on the new Picton Terminus for the new ferries, which all got canned. So he's coming across and will work as a project manager working for Francois on the recovery. So there is signs of some of that happening, but salary expectations are still quite high, and so we're just having to move, just rethink our current structure so we're actually competitive in this current market.
Okay, thank you. And just my other question is, is around attending the Kiruru Gorge meeting yesterday with you, Craig, and just to understand, you know, I thought our work was exemplar through the cyclone response and recovery early days last year. I think that there is the opportunity now to be able to engage both with the wider community who are watching our progress and also the local communities through the connectors, but the wider community who use all our roads for tramping, fishing, hunting and so forth, all our rural roads. So I'd like us to go back to think about a monthly update like we did do through the cyclone. And Naomi will have a brainwave on what this looks like, but I think that we just need to be communicating about, you know, this is next, this is next, this is next. We've just let that, we're just doing that. We're grading the road here. Just to have it on a website updated actually isn't enough at the moment.
So if I may,
yes.
that's exactly the conversations Naomi and Di and I have been having, and with Aileen and the connectors, and almost putting out, and this is not the right framing, they'd have a much better framing, but just a complete information update and that timing in and around when the LTP is going out, because we have a wider community who are going to see some significant costs. Not all of them are cyclone related, but we have a large urban population particularly who, if you haven't gone driving out around our rural roads, you may not appreciate just how much damage is still out there. So the intent was to have quite a bigger story, leveraging and pointing people to that website information, but actually putting it out there. The meetings that are happening in the community are going quite well now. The website stuff is starting to get to the mark, and there's still enhancements around spatial mapping. And so, yeah, but getting that sort of state of a nation big update and then more frequent shorter ones is exactly the plan.
The next slip to be done, the team are working over here now, and we just have to keep getting that message out to reassure that we're across this and we can cope, because there is a lot of questions that are coming to me at the moment.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Sandra. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Within this framework, water renewals, wastewater renewals, new pumps, new pipes, etc. Mr. Thu, what assurance can you give councillors that we haven't cut too much out and that we're still on track for making sure that we're not going to have, in a perfect world, significant breakdowns? Just thinking about their war report and who he is and what he has provided us.
I'm wondering if I haven't actually seen the war report, but I know he did the work for the committee.
Yeah.
And he was looking at a bulking level of investment of renewals versus the investment adjustment.
I just wondered, therefore, through you, if that question could be answered, even if it's via an email to councillors.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
part of this monitoring report is making sure that we're also investing appropriately in the right place at the right time. And one of the assurances will be the information we've got back.
Yeah, to some extent, Councillor Kerr, that was we probably looked at that during the LTP working progress with the councillors, but we can arrange that if you like that. So to do that, yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Right. Thank you for your questions. Officers obviously take a lot of effort to do those, so thank you for the time and effort to do that. Oh, Anna, Councillor Abbott, did you just have a question? Did you? I just saw your...
It was just more of a comment just to follow on, thank you, Mr. Chair, from the roading complaints that we are fielding when we go to these community meetings. But then when I actually look at the complaints that we receive through the telecommunications, we've only received 8 complaints over a whole quarter. So we are encouraging our community to dial in, but am I reading that correctly? On page 70, it actually highlights the complaints and only 8 complaints regarding road quality, safety, etc. That's how I read it.
Through you, Chair, there are two parts to people calling in. One is where they may be making a complaint around how things were done or how interactions or there's been delays. If someone rings in saying there is a leak, that is not logged as a complaint, it's logged as a job and it goes off to get done. And so if the first call comes in, that there's a pothole repair that's required, so that gets logged up as a pothole. We can pull those transactions off those work and maintenance systems, but those transactions in the similar vein to Danny going out and doing things, that tracks in the quite a large number, because part of how we do things, we don't have enough staff and we don't pay enough to contractors to see everyone drive every road all the time or look through. So our community is part of our surveillance network, and that's why we keep really pushing in those meetings, 871 5000, call it through. That goes straight to the contractors through there, and it's only if it's outside of scope that then needs an officer to approve it. So that plays through with trees, litter, dumping. So those don't to show up as a complaint if it's not fully logged.
Thank you. Councillor Shalom.
Just to end on a high note, I noted in the report and just wanted to congratulate everyone on the fact that we decided to go fines free at our library on the 1st of December, and I see in this quarterly report there is a significant rise in the number of returning lapsed users as a result of that. So that's a really great positive social outcome. So just congratulations to the council for making that decision, and congratulations for the team for bringing it to us and rolling it out. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor Shalom. Thank you to all the officers who prepared all the reports. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Nixon, and seconded Councillor Watkins. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So there being no minor items or urgent items, that is the end of our business. I'd just like to thank Taylor for all the work that she's done on the new performance measures report as well. So thank you. And to the members of the public that have joined us, thank you, and have a happy and safe Easter. So ending with a karakia, unless anybody wants to, I can just end with a short note. Yes, so yep. So I hope everybody has a safe and happy Easter, and it is a privilege for us all here to serve Hiratonga in the Hastings Hiratonga district, the bountiful district that we live in. So, amini. Thank you. We'll just wait till the Zoom goes off.